Welcome to a Wiser Retirement podcast. Before we get started with the episode, I want to tell you about a new ebook available on our website called Buyer Beware. Why do they keep trying to sell you that annuity? This ebook covers the various types of annuities, negatives to owning annuities, and better investment alternatives to annuities. To download this ebook, you can click the link in the episode notes or go to wiserinvestor.com and you'll find it at the bottom of the page. Now on to today's episode.
Welcome to a Wiser Retirement Podcast. We believe the best financial advice should always be conflict-free. I'm your host, Casey Smith. Guiding you to financial freedom today is my co-host, Robert Swarthout. Hey, Robert.
Good morning.
Robert is the founder and CEO, principal manager of Teton Crypto Capital.
Mouthful.
Yes. And a regular, once a month.
Once a month.
On our Crypto Spotlight series here. So let's kind of dive in, Robert. Let's talk about Ripple versus the SEC case.
Yeah. So we actually had some movement about a week and a half ago, but it's a Judge Torres, the judge presiding over the case, kind of came back and gave her ruling on which particular pieces of evidence would be released to the public and what level of redactions would be or would not be allowed in them. Some of them, were mundane stuff. Other stuff, really the I guess the crown jewel of all this, to at least the public, they've been waiting for, is the Hinman documents around Bill Hinman and his speech that he gave in 2018.
So Bill Hinman is who?
He used to be the director of the enforcement division of the SEC when Jay Clayton was there.
And that's important because basically the lawsuit alleges that Ripple's not a commodity, or it's a
no, they're saying it's a security.
It's a security,
and
they have security violations because of it.
Yes, they sold unregistered securities. Is the premise of the lawsuit. I think that the facts around that are pretty clear at this point. That if anything, there was a lot of confusion, and they should have had notice that they were doing it before they actually were sued for it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it doesn't appear to be a security. At least the secondary sales. So if we were to go buy XRP, we would be buying. Is it a commodity? I'm not sure, but it's not a security, I guess is the easy way to say it. But the documents are up in Bill Hinman. There was 52 drafts of his speech that the SEC claims were his opinion, not the SEC's opinion, but he was having SEC lawyers and internal employees help them draft this. So it's like, okay, seems odd to call it a personal opinion. Because in the speech, he claimed that Ethereum was not a security, and kind of get what they call the Ethereum free pass. So you could make an argument back when he was saying that it probably was a security. Today, it's likely not. There's some arguments to be made around the way it does staking that maybe it is, but we'll leave that for a different day.
Okay. So has anything been released? I'm sure he was deposed and asked.
He did give a deposition, and I don't think any of that has been released. So what everyone really wants to see is what's in those drafts. Like, how did the speech change? And it's just a bunch of, shady things have happened, in my opinion.
Yeah.
There's speculation that he was originally going to be saying XRP and Ethereum aren't securities. Because, like, at the time when he gave that speech, XRP had a higher market cap than Ethereum. So it's kind of like, that's weird for him to go down to because Bitcoin already had clarity with air quotes around that.
Right.
But, and then nothing else in the market did. So why did he go to number 3 and bypass number 2? So there's questions around that. There's been a lot of internet sleuthing. The law firm that he comes from and works for, still a partner at, was the law firm for the Ethereum project.
Oh.
So there's just like it feels like backroom dealings, right? Like a little self-serving. So the documents will be coming out. The judge ruled that they do need to be released. And she didn't say this, but apparently normally there's a 21-day clock that starts ticking to kind of get all that done, because lawyers have to abide by her ruling and figure out what redactions are allowed and which ones are not. Maybe it's to protect an individual's name that's not pertinent to the issue, type stuff. And that clock was ticking, and then like 2 or so days after that announcement, Ripple and the SEC jointly agreed to extend it an additional week. Okay, that's weird, but you wonder why. Little speculation here. Right. I'll admit if there was any crimes committed by Bill Hinman in what he did, and it's questionable. There could be. We don't know all the details, but the 5-year statute of limitations runs out because that was extended a week.
Oh, wow.
So, if he committed a crime and doesn't have to pay the price of that, it's unfortunate for the country that he kind of gets that. Who knows what kind of negotiations are going behind the scenes? Like, why would Ripple do that? Maybe they're getting something in exchange that's important to them, because Ripple has to defend themselves. They're not here to defend moral high ground.
They spent how much money defending themselves?
Recently Brad Garlinghouse's CEO said by the time this is over, it will be over $200 million. And the idea that a company needs to spend $200 million to fight a lawsuit that probably, when it's all said and done, should have not had been filed.
Right.
It just is so sad. It's embarrassing for the country. And it's just there's not many, private companies that could afford to do that.
Right.
Ripple's in a position where they have a strong business from everything that I understand, and they have cash on hand to be able to do this. And granted, $200 million over 2.5 years, so you get to spread it out a little bit. It's still a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's could have been spent on development of a product or marketing or something that actually pushes the business forward. Oddly enough, this case, they will have spent money on actually fighting this that, in my opinion, will push the business forward, but you shouldn't have to spend it on fighting the government.
Correct.
You should be able to spend it on...
And how much have taxpayers paid on the other side?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question.
Probably
even
not as much, but still.
Probably, or, you could claim it's maybe more, right? Like, because you can't imagine the SEC is all that efficient in what they're doing either.
Yeah, that's true.
Ripple paid for the best attorneys money could buy. There's no doubt about that. But it's just, it's just in a situation where, I beat this drum all the time. We need regulations, and Congress needs to step up, because if there was a clear rule book to play by, this wouldn't have happened, and we would have been further along. The U.S. is getting left behind in crypto. I mean, there's no doubt about it at this point. And do we have the ability to correct that wrong and play catch up? I still think that opportunity exists, but for how much longer, it was kind of tough. So,
well, the government doesn't have much incentive to promote crypto, honestly.
Yes and no. There's the incentive to protect the status quo. I get that.
Right.
But if you use the internet analogy here, like, if they didn't promote the internet, we wouldn't have Google based in the US. We wouldn't have all these, Apple, all these big companies that are internet focused that are trillions of dollars in value would be either doesn't exist or they're not in US jurisdiction. And that's like meaningful jobs, meaningful tax dollars. Like, it does matter. And crypto, in my opinion, will be bigger than the internet when it's all said and done. You fast forward a decade, 2 decades, something like that.
Interesting.
And you're at the cusp of losing the brightest minds to politics.
Yeah. To other countries.
Other countries.
They're willing to.
There's country moving very quickly. It's like the UAE has been very aggressive with setting up like taxless zones where you can come in and do the work. You can even like sell crypto in a low tax or no tax way if you're following by the rules. And those countries are laying out rules and letting people, people can choose if they want to go play by those rules versus retroactively changing the rules.
Yeah.
The way the U.S. is
doing
doing
it. What do you think the outcome is now? In the past, you've been very confident that Ripple wins, right? And how do you think this changes that based on what's happened recently?
Ripple's going to win. I don't think it's going to be an outright win. I think the judge is a little bit, smart enough to realize that there are things that Ripple did that potentially they could have done better. So I think the most likely scenario at this point is Ripple wins in the sense that any sales of XRP they've done since they have launched their on-demand liquidity product, which was mid to late 2018, so those sales and any secondary sales are not securities. Prior to that, that you can make a very strong case that there's parts of XRP in the sales that Ripple did, say 2017 and prior, that act like a security. Right. They may pay a fine for that. I think that they would happily pay that fine and move on at this point.
Right.
They publicly said once they're through this, they're going to go public. You're not going to go public with this hanging over your head.
No. They have to go public to recoup the $200 million they spent.
Well, what's funny is $200 million is a lot of money, obviously, but in the game that they're playing, it is a rounding error. The problem that they're trying to solve, cross-border payments is just the first thing. They're starting to hint at they may be doing some stuff around tokenization,
right,
and solving real problems. Just this last week they launched a platform to help central banks build CBDCs. They would use a version of the XRP ledger, a second copy of it, and then they would interface with XRP. Like the holdings that Ripple holds of XRP tokens could be worth so much money down the road that the $200 million was a they got off cheap type viewpoint.
Interesting.
And it would not surprise me if it played out that way. Ripple's seems to be a very strong business. They have roughly 800 employees. The vast majority of their hiring they're doing now is outside the U.S. Just actually last week, they had a lot of announcements last week. One was the CBDC platform I just mentioned. And second was they bought a business that is based in Switzerland. It's a institutional custodian that is done not just crypto, is doing like other assets as well. And they paid $250 million to buy that. So it's like they got cash. They're being aggressive in this down market that is crypto right now.
You can't buy Ripple in the U.S. right now, but not directly, I guess.
Ripple, the equity, you can. XRP, the token, is a little challenging. You can buy it at Uphold, but functionally, no.
What? How's the price been moving with all this news?
Crypto in general, I think you got to frame it that way, has been sideways for the vast majority of May. It's a sideways, understand the macro environment that it's in. Bitcoin, it's all about what Bitcoin's doing. XRP, the token, has been showing some interesting strength during times that other cryptos have not. It'll bump up and down. It was, ran up 10% really quickly once the judge ruled on this disclosures, right? Like it feels like it's primed. This is not financial advice. It feels like it's primed to run a little bit here once there's a ruling and get some clarity, assuming it's a positive ruling, which seems likely at this point.
Let's shift gears and talk about Coinbase. So Coinbase had to sue the SEC. We talked about that a little bit in our last podcast with you.
Yeah.
What's happening on that front?
Yeah, taking a little bit higher view of Coinbase, back when the SEC sued Ripple, relatively short order after, within I think like less than a month, Coinbase delisted XRP, among many other exchanges here in the U.S. And people were upset about that because Coinbase is a big enough player, is publicly traded,
right,
or about to be publicly traded at that point, that it felt like they're the big guy. They could take the stand. They could try to help protect the industry, but they largely took the back seat. And then they waited roughly 2 years before they spoke up about the Ripple SEC case. Then they were filing amicus briefs at the end. It seems a little bit too late, too little too late type mentality. But so along the way, apparently behind the scenes, the SEC and Coinbase were meeting, trying to figure out to answer Coinbase's question around, can you help us with rulemaking? What's a security? What's not? Coinbase even presented 2 different frameworks that they thought could be workable going forward to get opinions from the SEC. They've met 40 different times over the course of, I think, like just shy of a year. So active meetings, right?
Yeah.
Basically weekly, if you think about it that way. And they were answering questions. And at the end, the SEC's like, thank you very much. We don't have any comment. Oh, and here's your Wells notice. We plan on suing you for selling unregistered securities.
Oh, jeez.
It's like, we've been a good faith actor.
Right.
Like, why are you doing this to us? And then that is sat for nine months. That was like last summer. And the SEC just basically, put its fingers in its ears and not paying attention. So roughly a month and a half ago, the Coinbase sued the SEC in, I want to say it's appellate court. I forget exactly which level of court it's at, but to basically to have the court compel the SEC to give a yes or no answer to their question. Like, dumbed it down, right? I mean,
right.
In some ways it's a poke in the eye. And that has not been ruled, but it seems likely that the SEC is going to get upheld to do the answer, right? Like, because there's no like law saying the SEC has to respond in 6 months, but there is something in the law around language that says something like in a reasonable time. what's reasonable. Like you're starting to get what many people would seem unreasonable at this point. And the challenge with it is, Coinbase, while they're provoking the SEC to give an answer here, they also made us get the answer of the SEC saying no.
Right.
Just to spite them. I don't know how that's going to turn out. I actually think that there's a chance that the SEC starts to understand, they haven't appeared to care about their reputation at all for the last 2.5, 3 years. There may be a crack in that strategy, and that maybe they're starting to soften that a little bit. I don't know. Time will tell. I look forward to kind of hearing what that is. But at the end of the day, the SEC can make these rules, but the guidelines, again, need to come from Congress and be regulations and be part of law to get rid of this confusion. It's just wasting, I can't imagine how much Coinbase has spent time and money of people hours and legal fees to turn around and do that with the SEC when Congress could have done their job.
Right.
So.
Well, but it's not just SEC. You think about Google being sued by the government now for a transaction that was approved by the government.
Right. Yeah.
It's the same kind of concept. Google says we're going to buy this company and we need your permission to get the rubber stamped, and then a decade later, or less than a decade later, they come back and say, we're suing you for antitrust because you should never have bought that company.
Right.
And you're like, well, but you approved it. But it doesn't seem to matter. It's bullying.
Yeah.
Is what it is.
It's bullying, and
it's not even about search. People think about with Google, the antitrust lawsuit has nothing to do, it's about ads.
Right.
It has nothing to do with search. Google dominates search, but the government's not concerned about that.
Yeah. It's our politics are becoming dirtier and dirtier, and with the administration, it's just, nothing gets done in Congress because we're playing all these other games, and it's just kind of like, I don't know. I'm not old enough to say the good old days, but the good old days seem rather nice at this point, even 10 years ago. It didn't even have to be too far.
I was reading an old article that popped up somewhere along the way of me researching something else. And I don't remember the Speaker of the House name when Ronald Reagan was in, but these guys would bash each other and over policy, and then they would go and have dinner afterwards, and man, you can imagine any of the speaker having dinner or hanging out or going to church with the other side, and it's gotten so polarized, and Trump didn't make it any better because he proved that you could be mean and nasty,
right,
and you could get away with it, and then it's transferred into society.
Right.
So now people talk to each other that way.
Right.
It's really bad. It's really bad.
Yeah. Super sad.
All right. So we have another lawsuit with Grayscale. Now Grayscale runs they run a lot of things actually.
Yes.
But they have the ETF, right?
No, they want an ETF.
They want an ETF because they have a trust fund.
Yes. They have the publicly traded trust, the big one being GBDC. That's the GBTC, excuse me.
Right.
That's, the publicly traded trust for Bitcoin. I want to say they have roughly a dozen of these things,
Right.
They don't have one for a while they had one for XRP. When that also came out, they kind of wound that down. But there's Ethereum, there's some other ones. Just recently the SEC, I think gave notice that they were going to sue Grayscale because of one for Filecoin. You probably never heard of Filecoin, but it's one that they had this trust application for. And it's just kind of like, here we go again. But so this lawsuit that you're referring to with Grayscale. So Grayscale sued the SEC for not approving their ETF application. And they've done it multiple times.
And everybody wants a Bitcoin ETF. Everybody.
I mean, everybody that cares about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's been many applications.
Right. Maybe a dozen of these. I don't know. Quite a
Probably
lot.
more than that.
Yeah.
Because some of them have applied
multiple times. Yeah. Right. But maybe 12 unique sponsors.
Yeah.
So you have this going on, and it's just kind of at some point it doesn't make sense why it's not getting approved, because we have a futures ETF that's been approved. And the SEC is functionally claiming that there's not enough market publicly available information to have a functionally stable ETF. They don't. I think
in Bitcoin.
In Bitcoin,
yeah.
Which is bananas because there's so much public information. It's not even funny.
Right.
And then the judge. So what's I guess the update here is the judge, or excuse me, the panel of judges, because of the level of court they're at, it's a panel of judges, not just one. We're basically just question the SEC on why there's not enough information in their opinion, and it seems like these judges are really starting to see through these games that the SEC is playing, and at least I agree with it because it seems to be supportive of what I would like to see happen. But they are starting to really hold their feet to the fire, and it seems like the SEC is going to lose in this one. But I don't know.
But if they do, does that mean Grayscale gets the first Bitcoin ETF?
I don't know. Like they were the first one to apply for it originally.
To me, that it proves that SEC was wrong. Maybe there's damages of some sort.
They could file.
But it doesn't mean that a Bitcoin ETF gets approved.
I would imagine that part of the ruling would be that it has to be approved. I don't know. Like, it's a good question.
See how that pans out.
Yeah,
on the other end.
And there needs to be multiple providers of these ETFs, in my opinion, because it's going to get the fees down. The fees on this trust are absolutely absurd. And it's an ETF will be,
and it has a very wide range of bid and ask.
Right.
Like the premiums.
Yeah, it's just not liquid.
There's the fees, but then there's the
market,
the spread, which is huge.
Yeah, when the market's not trading well, that's what happens. And there's been a long history there of it not trading at what its current value of holdings of Bitcoin underneath the NAV is way lower. So, as I'm not a holder of GBTC, but I imagine those holders would be excited about an ETF because they basically get some liquidity out of it and maybe back to par. Yeah, maybe my guess. So.
Right. All right. So you attended a conference recently, Consensus.
Yes.
2023. Where was this?
This was in Austin. So this is
Austin's a happening place. Did you feel extra hip as you were walking through Austin?
This is my first time to Austin, and there's lots of things that people may be feeling hip about there.
Did you run into Elon?
I did not. No. I must be uncool too, because a lot of it I didn't feel very hip at. But the keep Austin weird type stuff. So the conference was cool. It's the first time I've been to it. It's basically the biggest crypto conference that is held in the U.S., maybe the world.
How many people?
Roughly 15,000 people attended. So
wow, that's a lot of hotel rooms.
A lot of hotel rooms, and what's really cool is I didn't have many expectations on what I was walking into. So it was kind of like just take it as it comes. A huge trade show floor with all sorts of businesses. And the part that surprised me the most was about the amount of Asian-based startups that were there that were obviously in crypto in some form or fashion. A much higher percentage than I would have ever guessed. I know that crypto is very much ahead of the curve over there.
In China, it's all been
I guess this would be Asia minus China.
Malaysia.
Yeah, Malaysia. Met one company that was from the Philippines. Obviously like South Korea. There's a lot of it.
Yeah.
So, it's just a wide range, a rather diverse group in general, even outside of, nationalities, whether it's men, women, like normally in tech, it's a bunch of white guys. This was, 60% men, 40% women, like really cool to see the diversity.
You have suits and hoodies?
Very little suits.
Mostly hoodies?
It was certainly business casual, hoodies, t-shirts, very much a tech conference mixed in with some, a little more business casual. Because they had multiple tracks of talks. They had very technical, they had gaming, and then they had like more of the business / policy / regulation track. Which that's where I spent most of my time. I'm not as much into gaming or the others, but a lot of opinions on Coinbase, Chief Legal Officer, CLO, was there. Paul, and so he talks and some other prominent Bitcoin, admittedly probably maximalists were there, but like, it was surprising the amount of, let me back up. The way that they had the trade show laid out was pretty cool because it kind of grouped certain types of businesses together. So if you cared about gaming, you can go to one section. The amount of gaming and crypto intersection stuff that's happening is pretty fascinating. Again, I'm not a gamer, but like I can totally see the use case there now.
Yeah.
And how powerful it's going to be. I think it's super early days for that, but the amount of exploration that's happening, whether it's free to play games or you're paying out of a crypto wallet as you go, so you're not really buying the game, you're kind of like renting it by the minute, effectively.
Right.
Or you're getting rewards in crypto, or you're able to sell your shields or whatever it may be and kind of move to a different game. I think there's a lot of crossover that's going to happen there.
Interesting.
And then, all the way down to there was a booth from the company, drawing a blank, super old school finance company that has a bond that has been tokenized on a blockchain. You can buy it on a blockchain. And
a bond fund or
a bond fund, yes.
Okay.
And it's super low liquidity. It's not actually.
Yeah, I was about to say that's might be a little ahead of its time.
Franklin Templeton.
Oh wow.
Yes. And it was fun to talk to them. They probably felt a little out of place at the conference too.
They were the suits.
Yes, they were in suits, but they were wearing like dry fit pullover shirts that had their stuff printed on it. So they felt hip.
Got it.
But
That's
it was
funny.
it was cool to kind of talk to them and understand their product and where it's going. But there was all sorts of service providers for crypto companies, service providers for immediately they maybe like accounting side of stuff, helping with the accountants do their stuff. But there's a wide range, but a lot of energy. And the speakers that I listen to, everyone's beating the regulation drum. Like it's just so loud. Like admittedly, it's a bit of an echo chamber there.
Yeah.
But it's, it just feels like it needs to happen so bad. And there was, they even had a representative from, I want to say the Caymans come and talk about how they're dealing with crypto down there and how admittedly they're ahead of the US. And, he talked a little bit about the stuff that happened with FTX, but, overall it was a great conference. And I think that, is it something that I go to every year? Probably not. But, if somebody really wants to dive deep and get an education in crypto and has 3 or 4 days, I think it's a decent option to kind of go to and get immersed in it and come home. So
interesting. Let's kind of wrap up with Ripple launching a platform for central banks.
Yeah. So there's
we haven't talked about this in a while. I mean, that's actually being studied here in the U.S. too, right?
Correct. Yep. I think that's called Project Hamilton here in the U.S. But so there's 200 something countries around the world in some form exploring a CBDC. So for all intents and purposes, the whole world.
Explain that acronym.
CBDC, so central bank digital currency. So money
so
is
like a digital dollar.
Exactly, a digital dollar. Money's digital now in the sense that it's a credit card or it's a through Apple Pay or something like that.
For us here.
For us and for most developed countries, right?
But not all countries are taking credit cards, though.
Correct. Or even like in Europe, there's not as much credit cards, but there's debit cards and there's electronic money. The difference with like a CBDC is that it would be money on a ledger and it's programmable. They could put rules around the money. So they could say this money, say you're getting some kind of assistance from the government, this money can only be spent at these kind of stores.
Right.
Or for these kind of products. Could be helpful. Some people like the idea, other people don't, right? Because right now cash is, you get to do what you want with it.
Yep.
I think that it could help take some of the fat out of the system in the sense that, government programs are abused. I think there's some possibility there. But, like when, I've used this example in the past, back in 2020, when there was all these stimulus checks coming out, they were trying to figure out how to get money to people. It could have happened immediately. They could have also said the money has to only be spent on food, rent. They could have literally locked the money down. The stock market wouldn't have gone as crazy as it did because everybody wasn't buying meme stocks.
Right, right, exactly.
But so there's all these different countries exploring what a CBDC might mean for them. Everyone has got either their own fiat or they're using someone else's fiat as their base currency. So there's those considerations. I think the U.S. will be one of the last countries to do this.
I don't see there's much incentive for the U.S. to do it, quite honestly.
I think I've thought about this a lot. I think the incentive for the U.S. is they start to be able to control a lot of the dollars that they don't get to control now. The whole euro dollar market functionally is out of the Fed's control. And if it was a CBDC, it's on a ledger, all of a sudden they control it. So it would take a while to kind of make that transition.
Control it from a trade standpoint,
everything,
not from an individual standpoint. Because I have a hard time believing that in the U.S. we'd ever go as far as China, where they know exactly that you brought cigarettes at 12:02 and you weren't supposed to, and they cut you off your allowance. Maybe we get to that.
Never say never.
I feel like there'd be a civil war. The North and South would divide.
I think there's a lot of friction against that in the U.S.
Right. Yeah.
But I would say,
there's laws in place for that too.
Correct. Well, the state laws like Florida has done are jokes. They don't get to control the currency. I'm not quite sure. They're just making a stand.
The government's running for the governor's going to be running for president. So that's why that's happening.
Yeah. But I think that, long term, what happens, I don't know. There's been, just generally, in my opinion, there's been a lot of erosion of freedoms over the last 20, 25 years. So we're sliding in the wrong direction there for that kind of trend. But what is a use case for U.S. CBDC? I think it's more like the Fed settling with the Euro, the European Central Bank, or other central banks. I don't see a CBDC functionally changing the lives of Americans all that much, day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
I think a stable coin like USDC almost acts like a retail CBDC, right?
Right.
So, long story short, I think that what Ripple's doing here is cool. I think they launched with 3 countries that they're exploring with right now. Palau's one of them. So small countries that functionally probably have a lot to gain for them, but rather low impact for the world. So the idea is Ripple's helping run a separate version or copy of the XRP ledger that they would run for that central bank. And then that would allow it to plug into the normal XRP ledger to do cross-border settlement or just kind of be able to interface with other currencies. So it kind of act as that middle conduit. Will they be successful? Time will tell. Ripple's been working on this for a while. There's been, just little things dribble out here and there over the last year or so. And it'll be interesting to kind of see how quickly it evolves now that they're public about it. When is the first country of consequence do this? I don't know. My guess is the Euro actually does it first of the G7, be my guess.
Wow. Yeah, it makes more sense for them too.
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to figure it out, and it's not really a country doing it. It's a part of the world.
Right.
So I don't know. It seems the most likely, but who knows? Maybe someone sneaks in and kind of does it. Maybe Japan. I could see Japan being another one high up on the list. So, but it's early days. Ripple's, certainly using the marketing engine around that right now. And, a lot of it, I wouldn't say it's stake, but, kind of tying all this together over the last 6 months as the SEC Ripple case has kind of progressed, you can see Ripple get more and more confident in the way that their executives are talking publicly, not just facial expressions, but just kind of the tone. And then you start to see stuff like this. They're buying companies. They feel like they're on a roll right now. Whether they are or not, I guess time will tell. It seems like it. And, I think strength builds on strength here. So,
Well, thanks for the updates, Robert. Great conversation as usual.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And
if anybody wants to get in touch with you about what you and your fund are doing, how would they do that?
You could reach out at robert@tetoncryptocapital.com.
Great. Thanks, Robert.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to a Wiser Retirement podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening, that way you don't miss any new episodes. We'd also appreciate if you could leave a rating and review. If you have any questions about anything that was discussed today, head to wiserinvestor.com and reach out. This episode was produced and edited by Ken Hoadley. This podcast is strictly for informational purposes only and is not to be considered as investment advice or a solicitation to buy or sell any financial products, securities, digital assets, or any other investment vehicles, or a basis to make any financial decisions. Wiser Wealth Management Incorporated is a registered investment advisor with the SEC. The host and/or guest may personally own securities, digital assets, or other investment vehicles mentioned on this podcast. Neither the host nor guest of the show are compensated for their participation, and no referral fees are paid to or received by any host or guest for clients, listeners, or similar interests. Investments involve risk, and unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Be sure to first consult with a qualified financial advisor, tax professional, insurance professional, and/or legal professional before implementing any strategy discussed herein. Past performance is not indicative of future performance.